No one in the town of Briar Hollow called it a hospital anymore. They called it the house. It sat at the far end of Warden Street, where the pavement cracked into dirt and the streetlights died one by one, as if the town had quietly agreed not to illuminate what lurked beyond them. Even in daylight, shadows seemed to pool around its foundation, thick and reluctant to move. Once, decades ago, it had been Briar Hollow Memorial Hospital, a place where life began and ended, where the scent of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the metallic tang that clung to every surface, where night shifts meant walking corridors that echoed with more than just footsteps. Then the hospital closed. Officially, it was due to structural concerns, though no one could explain why the building looked exactly the same as always. Unofficially, the town stopped talking. Some conversations, they learned, were better left unfinished. Years later, a private developer bought the building. They sealed off the medical wings with drywall that always seemed to sweat, painted over the blood-coloured tiles with white that yellowed within months, and carved the vast spaces into bedrooms. A single-family home, they advertised. Spacious, affordable, quiet. The first family lasted 3 weeks. They left in the middle of the night, abandoning their furniture and never collecting their security deposit. The second family made it 5 days. After that, no one kept count. By the time the house was abandoned again, the town treated it like a cancer in remission, something you didn't prod, didn't examine, didn't acknowledge unless someone younger and stupider brought it up. Which is exactly what happened on a Friday night in October, when the air carried the first bite of winter and the moon hung like a cataract in the sky. There were 8 of them. Ethan, all swagger and bravado, the one who turned every dare into gospel. Marcus and Lila, inseparable in their need to prove they feared nothing. Noah, whose nervous laughter had gotten shriller over the years. Jen and Cara, bound together since high school by shared secrets and matching scars on their wrists from a particularly dark junior year. Tom, who believed only in what he could touch, measure, and rationalize away. And Caleb, quiet, watchful, the one who noticed when shadows fell the wrong direction. They had grown up in Briar Hollow, breathing its stories like pollution. That's what made the bet feel electric instead of stupid. Sunrise, Ethan announced, leaning against his car with theatrical confidence. We stay until sunrise. No phones, I'm collecting them now. No leaving. Losers buy drinks for a month. The house loomed at the end of the street, its windows not just dark but hungry. Black squares that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. The building's proportions were wrong somehow, too tall and too narrow, like it had been stretched by invisible hands. Caleb felt ice crystallize in his chest as they approached. This used to be a hospital, he said, though his voice came out smaller than intended. Used to be, Tom replied, but his skepticism sounded forced. Now it's just an empty house. They crossed the threshold laughing, the kind of laughter that's more armor than amusement. The front door opened with the whispered sigh of a lung deflating. Inside, the air wasn't just cold, it was clinical. Temperature controlled with mechanical precision, as if invisible systems still hummed behind the walls, still regulated, still cared for whatever lived here now. The layout violated every rule of residential architecture. Too many doors led nowhere logical. Hallways curved just enough to play tricks on depth perception, making you walk farther than the building's exterior allowed. Rooms expanded beyond their walls like optical illusions made of drywall and shadow. Caleb crouched beside faded marks on the floor, lines that had been painted over but never erased. "Guys," he whispered, tracing the ghost letters with his finger. Look at this. Jen's flashlight beam trembled across the marking, Ward C Psychiatric. The word seemed to pulse under the light. They explored because standing still felt worse. The kitchen held no appliances, only the phantom outlines where they'd been bolted down, and metal loops in the floor where something had been chained. The living room reeked of disinfectant layered over something sweeter and more disturbing. Upstairs, bedrooms still bore metal anchor points bolted through the floorboards, not for furniture, but for restraints that had long since been removed. On every surface barely visible beneath coats of desperate white paint, older markings bled through: isolation, observation, do not feed. At midnight, Ethan forced another laugh and declared, still standing, still breathing. The words hung in the air like a challenge. That's when the doors began to close, not with violence or drama. They simply sealed. Every handle became immobile. Every lock clicked home with surgical precision. Phones showed no signal. Not unusual. But time stopped updating correctly. Caleb's digital watch ticked forward, skipped 10 minutes, then ran backward as if the house operated on its own temporal pulse. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "Very funny. Who's got the remote control for this place?" No one was laughing anymore. The sound started in the walls, low, rhythmic, organic, not footsteps, too steady, too synchronized, breathing, slow, measured, shared by something vast and patient. The house itself had developed lungs. They followed the sound because staying put meant listening to it grow louder, closer, more satisfied. It led them down a corridor that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier, past doors marked with medical terminology that made their skin crawl. Electroconvulsive therapy. Lobotomy-authorized personnel only. Terminal ward. At the end stood a heavy door, its paint blistered and peeling to reveal the words beneath. Intensive care, no unauthorized visitors. Lila reached for the handle. The metal was warm, body temperature warm. From inside came a voice, female, tired, professional. "Next patient, please." The door opened on its own with the whisper of well-oiled hinges. The room beyond wasn't empty. Hospital beds lined the walls in perfect clinical rows, their restraint systems intact and waiting. Yellowed curtains hung between them like old skin, stained with substances that defied identification. The air buzzed with the electrical hum of machines that couldn't be seen. On the nearest bed lay Marcus. The same Marcus who stood beside them, whole and terrified. "Guys?" whispered the Marcus on the bed, his eyes wide and pleading above the oxygen mask. "Why can't I feel my legs? Why can't I move?" The standing Marcus screamed, a sound that seemed to tear something fundamental in the room's fabric. The lights died. In the darkness, they heard the wet sound of something being absorbed, digested, processed. When the lights returned, only one Marcus remained. No blood, no struggle, no evidence, just an empty bed with restraints still warm and the lingering scent of medical-grade terror. Panic shattered their group like glass. They ran, but the house had become a maze designed by a malevolent architect. Hallways folded in on themselves. Staircases became Mimbius strips, leading up and down to the same impossible floor. Doors opened into rooms they'd already visited, but wrong, older, more clinical, as if they were travelling backward through the building's timeline towards something that should have stayed buried. The house took them one by one, and it was personal. Jen vanished after following her mother's voice calling from behind a blood-stained curtain. "Jennifer, honey, visiting hours are almost over. Come give Mummy one last kiss." Tom was found sitting peacefully in a wheelchair, wearing a hospital gown that none of them remembered seeing before. He smiled at them with glassy contentment and whispered, "The treatment is working." "I feel so much better now," before his eyes went empty and his body went slack. Noah discovered that the windows weren't glass. They were some kind of membrane that pressed inward when touched, warm and yielding like skin. When he tried to force one open, it stretched, then suddenly inhaled him through an opening that sealed immediately after. Caleb watched it happen. Watched Noah's terrified face disappear through what should have been solid matter. The house wasn't rushing, it was savouring. By the time only Caleb and Kara remained, the house felt populated. The breathing was louder now, not hungry, but satisfied, like a predator after a successful hunt. They barricaded themselves in what had once been an operating theatre. Surgical lights hung from the ceiling like dead eyes, their bulbs cracked but somehow still functional. Rusted instruments lay arranged on metal trays with obsessive precision, as if the next procedure was about to begin. Kara was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "This place isn't killing us," she whispered, and her voice carried the terrible clarity of someone who'd just solved a puzzle they wished they'd never seen. "It's treating us. It's still a hospital, Caleb. It never stopped being a hospital." The truth hit him like ice water in his veins. The hospital had never closed. It had simply evolved, changed its methods, adapted to new circumstances. It didn't want corpses, it wanted patients. Always had. Behind them, something that sounded like a door, but felt like a rib cage, creaked open. Kara stepped backward, her eyes focusing on something Caleb couldn't see. "I hear them calling my name," she said softly, and her voice carried a dreamy contentment that made Caleb's blood freeze. "They said the doctor will see me now. They said I can finally rest." Caleb grabbed her arm. Her skin felt feverish. "Kara, don't listen, don't!" She smiled, not at him, but at something standing directly behind him. "They said visiting hours are over, Caleb. They said you have to leave now." The surgical lights flared with the intensity of a seizure. When Caleb's vision cleared, Kara was lying on the operating table, restraints secured, an IV drip running into her arm. Her breathing was slow and peaceful, and she wore the same glassy contentment that Tom had died with. She looked cared for. Alone, Caleb wandered until muscle memory led him back to the front door. It stood open. Morning light spilled across the threshold like an invitation, and the October air smelled like freedom. Behind him, the house released a long, satisfied breath. Caleb ran. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out, until he reached the police station and collapsed on their steps, babbling about friends who were missing, about a house that was still a hospital, about breathing walls and medical procedures performed by invisible hands. They searched the building for weeks, found nothing, no signs of struggle, no bodies, no evidence that 8 teenagers had ever set foot inside. But Caleb knew better. His friends weren't dead. They were patients now. Cared for, treated, kept stable in ways that defied every natural law. The town boarded up the house again, though the boards never seemed to stay secure for long. And Caleb left Briar Hollow that same day, driving until he reached a city where hospitals looked like hospitals and houses looked like houses. But sometimes, late at night, when the world grows quiet and his own breathing sounds too loud, he hears it, that slow, measured rhythm, patient and eternal, still treating, still caring, still waiting for visiting hours to begin again.